I thought I'd try an audio piece. Let's go back to memories of Dad. Who was my father? My father was an engineer who basically went through the ROTC program in the Navy, where if you were willing to buckle down and get a 4-year degree in 3 years, they would guarantee you that you would enter the Navy as an officer instead of as a grunt. My father, having a brain roughly the size of the sun, thought this might be a good idea and indeed got a mechanical engineering degree in 3 years and then served in the Navy. After coming out of the Navy, I'm not sure exactly where he went, but at some point he wound up at Reaction Motors, a rocket engine company, which, to the best of my knowledge, worked on some of the engines for the X-15 rocket plane, which still holds piloted airspeed records to this day. Oh my. Yes, indeed. And then, whether you agree with it or not, he worked on the Atlas IV Intercontinental Ballistic Missiles program, which was a completely functional intercontinental ballistic missile that I personally believe put the fear of Jesus into the Kremlin itself, because they knew that American engineers with huge brains had made sure that it was going to work. Not maybe, but yes, indeed. Not just vaporize, but turn you into plasma. Yes, the glowing fourth state of matter. Yeah, put the fear of Jesus in me, I'll tell you. Anyway, so such was my father. He worked for vending machine companies where he figured out how to not have sugar crystallize on coffee machines because the Japanese like their coffee so sweet that it would literally grow rock candy out of the spigot. All kinds of problems. Nothing was too much for him. Growing up, I was blessed with the benefit of him loving to tinker with cars and all things mechanical, had a wood shop just like his father did. I was the youngest of the bunch, and his back was not as good as it should have been at that point, so I became his tool monkey, whether I liked it or not. Just being near this man, you were infused with such knowledge you couldn't help it to watch. My father also had the attitude that, I don't know whether it was survival of the fittest or what, but he would hand you an electric drill at the age of 5 years old and say, here, drill a bunch of holes in this board, and assume that if you were stupid enough to hurt yourself, well, then you should be culled from the herd. The same was true of electricity, with some modifications. He started me off on low voltage. I remember we were watching the whole Apollo project go, and I was fascinated by it, and of course he was as well. And he brought home had a bunch of indicator lights and drilled holes in a board and put all the indicator lights in and a bunch of switches, and then had me and one of my friends help wire the thing up so that it had nothing more than 5 lights on a board. There was one that was a light with a switch next to it, which was the master, and then 4 individual lights with individual switches. But to young kids back then, this was enough of a toy that we could imagine ourselves at the control center. Yes, it's all it took. Back then, the kids today, they have no idea. They have no imagination. They're immersed in flat panel displays, and I wish I had it too. And what the internet could have done for me might be staggering. But nonetheless, we immersed ourselves in what we had. And I have pictures of me just wrapped in cables with a train transformer and 1,000 extension cords around my neck, playing with electricity, because we would fire this little indicator board up from a train transformer. So now we had 5 things to play with. The master switch would make all 5 lights light up at once, or whichever one of the other lights you had turned on. You could vary the intensity by changing the setting on a train transformer, so you could make the lights glow dim or bright. Oh, wonderful things. How much did the little mind learn about electricity through this simple circuitry? An incredible amount. It gave me a gut feel for voltage, current, switching, illumination, lights. It's incredible. So in an enriched environment like that, it's amazing what one will pick up. My best friend's father was a PhD physicist at Bell Labs. So if my father didn't know the answer, he often knew the answer. His mother was just an incredible ceramics artist who made 1/12 miniature stuff for doll houses. Little tea sets that were incredibly detailed to the nth degree. She would work with tiny little brushes through a huge magnifying lens with a circular fluorescent light around it. Had hands that were so steady, it was unbelievable, and had a heart the size of a planet. So those are big influences on my life. And my mother, who of course finished teaching as a Masters of English plus 10 or 15 credits, I believe, is how the school district had to pay her. So on her way to a doctorate degree. Incredibly enriched environment. Now, were we given stuff? No, we pretty much had to earn it. You got a few cents allowance, and you were expected to take out the trash and empty the dishwasher and clean windows and do whatever they asked you to do. You could always ask for a little extra work. Usually it wound up being weeding or something like that. I remember I dug 40 holes to put in 40 pine trees by the back for 40 cents a piece each. It wasn't child exploitation, though. It was child learning back then. Indeed. Nonetheless, we got our pine trees. Many of them died from salt from the highway, but a few took. A fine memory has come up. I remember I was so power obsessed that I begged my father to show me how to build a little generator. And he promised he would, so one Saturday morning, finally I reminded him of his promise, and he got up, and after having a hearty breakfast, we went downstairs, and he found 2 little toy motors out of some sort of toys. Think of, I don't know, a stack of 15 or 20 quarters with a little shaft coming out of the end. That's about the size of them. And he took the 2 of them and hooked them up to each other. And to one, he hooked up a light. And to the other, he hooked up 3 D batteries that he kind of strapped on there with some tape and whatever else, and a switch. So if you turned on the one motor, it would indeed take the 3 D batteries in series, each one 1.5 volts, adding to each other to make 4.5 volts, would run the one motor. And the one motor would drive the other motor. And because they were permanent magnet motors, anytime a magnet whizzes by a coil of wire, it will generate some power. So they will not only act as a motor, but they will act as a generator. And that was enough to get that light to just come on somewhat. And he went, there you go, there is a generator. Now, such would be cute enough, but I ran next door to play with my next door neighbor a little girl whose father was a television sales and repair shop back in those days. Much to my delight, when we flipped this thing on for demonstration, it interfered vigorously with the television signal. Of course it did. It had 2 brush-type motors that were putting out all kinds of sparks, which made all kinds of interference with anything that works on radio. Raw sparking in the air creates tremendous radio interference, if you did not realize that. And this is the reason that things break up in lightning storms. You can hear a crackle in your radio and so forth. Same basic idea. Well, being the devious little children that we were, we couldn't help but wait till my neighbor's father, who was of course, television repairman, and had absolutely immaculate reception. There was never a speckle. Of course not. He understood every principle that operated that television and the antenna and had tuned everything to glorious perfection. So when he settled in to watch a game on a Sunday afternoon, it came in right, unless there was a thunderstorm. Okay. We snuck outside with my new generator and waited for him to settle in, and then I flicked the controls on as my next-door neighbor peered through the window, and just as he got up to try to make some sort of adjustments, I would turn it off. And we went back and forth like this 3 or 4 times until our tremendous laughter gave us away. And indeed, he was somewhat amused. All right. Had a paper route. I forget, about age 11, I guess I was past the paper route from someone next door who was going off to college. I think I made 4 cents for delivering a paper. Anyway, you kind of lived off of tips, and what you could make from Christmas tips were pretty awesome. And being a frugal fetus, I saved and saved. Then I would beg the parents for something I wanted, which really shouldn't have. And at one point, I got a go-kart. Yes, from one of the kids at school. I forget what age I was exactly, but probably 13 or something like that. 3.5 horse, brand new Briggs & Stratton it had on it. Yes, and a chromoly frame. It hung down low. It was yellow with a golden engine on it and a black seat. I'd get in that and zoom around the little block in my neighborhood. And because we really were just like a dead-end cul-de-sac with a horseshoe on it, there was very low traffic. If you weren't one of the 24, 25 houses in our neighborhood, you really didn't drive there. Anyway, I loved this thing, would pick up and drop off my friends with it. But of course, being the fetus I was, it wasn't too long before I decided I would try reaching back and holding the governor open and seeing how fast she would go. Well, she went pretty fast just before I threw the connecting rod. Clank, 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 and brought it to a stop. Soon I learned how to wrench engines. Did Dad do it? Negative. You did it. You go take care of it. So rode the bicycle down to the air-cooled division of the local automotive parts store and got myself a connecting rod for $4 and some odd cents, if I remember correctly. And my brother gave me a little bit of advice, and we took it apart and put a fresh connecting rod, and luckily I hadn't done anything too severe to the cylinder walls in there. And rode the thing for several years. A delightful experience. Eventually, bored of that, I sold it, and my brother, one of his friends, who whole family was motorcycle nuts, had a little Bronco 50. This is a little mini bike with a 4-speed transmission on it and a 50cc Italian-made engine, I believe, Garrelli. And the shifter was on the opposite side from most of the motorcycles you've seen. Nonetheless, an awesome piece of machinery. Front shocks, rear shocks, headlight, speedometer, the whole 9 yards. I got this thing for a song and a dance. The clutch cable was broken and just rode the hell out of it. Had a great time on this. Hit ridiculous speeds going downhill. Indeed, the top gear in this, 4th gear, was so high that it would not go on flat ground. in fourth gear. Third gear was what you used on flat ground. But going downhill, you could shift it into fourth, and if you tucked into it, I think I got it up to 60 miles an hour once. Crazy little fetus that I was, going down what they refer to as Church Hill, a place in Pennsylvania with just a dirt road where we used to have a farm. Anyway, after that, I sold that, and at some point I got the Yamaha CT-175 from my brother's friend. Now, indeed, the professor's mind was overwhelmed with the power, and it wasn't but, a month or so before he indeed damn near killed himself and dislocated his neck and wound up in a rotating bed and traction for 28 days. I highly recommend that you graduate the power and voltage levels and the power of a fetus's firearms appropriate with their abilities to handle it. But that's just my personal opinion. Perhaps I should have been culled from the herd.